What's the worst thing you've witnessed at a wedding? Only horrible for one person. The main hostess for the reception of about 30 guests. She carried in the 3-tier wedding cake rather than using a cart. She not only dropped it, but fell face first into it on the floor. First dead silence, then a few giggles, and then her emotional breakdown, like I have never seen before. She was completely devastated from both the embarrassment and ruining that special moment. We all eventually assured her that we are half drunk and don't care about the cake. The best part was that she easily collected $1,000 more in tips than she would have had that not happened. At a wedding of a college friend of my husband's, we learned that the bride, his old friend, had been in love with him for over a decade. We learned this from the women at our table at the reception. We introduced ourselves while we waited for the bride and groom to arrive. They were horrified that we were there and extremely worried. My husband had no idea that she had feelings for him. She beelined right for our table after the introducing Mr. and Mrs. thing, ignoring her family and leaving her husband standing alone. She clung to my husband and sobbed, lifting her head to glare at me. She had to be pulled off of him. She repaired herself, then followed us as we tried to leave quietly. Her parting shot was to stare at my chest and say, "Well, I guess I know what I was missing all along." Her new husband was in shock and my husband was horrified and embarrassed. He was completely clueless and would never have gone to the wedding if he'd known she was obsessed with him. It was bizarre. Ex-girlfriend of the groom showed up at the wedding, uninvited and drunk. He broke up with her 10 years earlier and has not seen her in over 8 years. She was loud and saying very perverted thing about what she wanted to do to the groom. The bride steps up, goes all out, and punches the ex in the face, knocks the ex out cold. The bride, we know, is a normally calm and peaceful person. A few of us carry the ex out of the reception and drop her at her apartment about 20 minutes away. Bride told my wife that there is nothing that will ruin my wedding day. Bride and groom were 2 hours late to the wedding. Neither one of them has a license, but had to have a wedding out in the woods. They never thought to contact anyone and ask for a ride to their wedding. Of course they didn't pay the cell phone bill and it got shut off. Didn't matter because there was no cell reception where we were anyway. My aunt's second wedding. She married the guy who lived 2 houses down from her. That's not the issue. The worst part was the toast at the reception. Another neighbor got up. "I want everyone to raise their glasses. 15 years ago, we all moved into this neighborhood married to the wrong people. By the end of the summer we will all be married to the right people." Came to find out 8 couples had gotten divorced and remarried within the neighborhood, or as I call it, played musical spouses. We left very quickly. My dad taking pictures at my brother's wedding. It doesn't sound bad, but he was getting in the way of the photographer my brother hired. Every pic he tried to take, my dad was right beside him, inching him out and pushing him out of the way. My brother and mom were both really pissed at him. Was a wedding DJ for 7 years. Just several hundred weddings. Seen a lot of stuff. One horrible thing I've witnessed, I introduce the best man to give his speech and hand him the mic. He starts out by saying, paraphrasing because this was years ago, but pretty close to the quote IRC, "Well, there were a lot of things that I didn't agree with in this relationship when it first started, and that I still don't agree with, because it's seriously messed up and unbalanced and the dynamic is too one-sided, etc etc." He's staring at the bride while saying this, proceeds to trail off, but that's not why we're here today. We are here to celebrate the marriage between Jack and Ingrid, so I just want to say congratulations, best of luck to you guys, etc etc. Everyone in the whole place was just looking around, glancing nervously at one another. Afterwards the father of the groom or bride, can't remember which one, comes up to me and says, "Thank you for not cutting the mic. I saw you looking at the head table and at us for direction, and when you didn't get it, you didn't act. I appreciate that, because I think it would have been even more awkward if he had just been cut off and didn't get the chance to at least come back to congratulating them." Most awkward compliment I've ever received. My parents had a pretty disastrous wedding. I wasn't there to witness it, but my parents and the guests tell the stories all the time. The wedding was in July. They were expecting a hot sunny day, but it ended up being a major downpour. My mother had a taxi scheduled to take her from her hotel to the church. Due to the rain, the taxi was super late. As my mother was waiting, in her wedding dress, she gets hit by a car. She gets knocked to the ground, but it wasn't hard enough to break any bones, so she just walks it off. Unfortunately, her dress picked up a lot of the mud from her fall and a big chunk of lace was torn. It turns out the car that hit her was actually the taxi that was supposed to pick her up. She finally makes it to the church. My father was in tears, on the verge of a nervous breakdown, thinking that she wasn't going to show. Again, because of the rain, about a third of the guests didn't make it. The rest of the ceremony went okay. At the reception, the hotel was understaffed due to the rain and the DJ couldn't make it, again, due to the rain, so the reception consisted of guests sitting around in a silent room waiting for food. A +1 soon decides that she is literally dying of hunger, so she goes up and cuts a slice of the wedding cake for herself before my parents had taken pictures with the cake or sliced it. On the positive side, later on they discovered that a restaurant in the hotel had a jukebox, so the restaurant lets them move it into the banquet hall, and they are able to pop in some quarters to get music playing. It was a disaster at the time, but now they look back at it and laugh. The DJ got so drunk that she couldn't even stand. She didn't have the bride's wedding song, so a group of people all joined hands and tried to sing the song, some random country crap, for her, and she just stood in the middle of the circle crying in her dress, and no one knew the lyrics. And her father got wasted and started a fight which ended with him destroying a stop sign with his fists. Let's not forget that us in the wedding party got picked up in an AskReddit stretch limo. Classy, classy, classy Florida. The groom's sister got sorority girl wasted in the limo on the way to the reception. She stashed a brown paper bag with 2/5 of pucker under her chair for the Lord's Prayer. She held my hand the entire time chanting, "I need to pee." She drank heavily all through the meal and then caught the bouquet. The guy that caught the garter had his head shoved up her dress while he was putting it on her. Once he finally emerged from her cavern of drunk doom, he was bright red and ran away. She chased him around and literally flung herself at him to dance grope him in front of everyone. She got bored with that and started dancing on the DJ's table. The bride was mortified and in all but tears, so her brother picked up this drunk mess and tried to carry her outside. This sent the redneck boyfriend into a rage and he picked a fight with the brother. The cops were called. I just sat there wishing I had popcorn to watch the mess. My husband and I were invited to the wedding of a military buddy of his. We were running a little late, but weren't too worried. We got onto base and headed for the main chapel. There are 3 or 4 chapels on base. When we got to the main chapel, it was apparent that there was no wedding going on. Looked at the invitation again. It just said post chapel and gave an address. So obviously, this wasn't the post chapel that the bride had intended, and I whipped out my phone to look up the address. We drove to that part of the base and found the place. It was some sort of administration building, definitely not a chapel. We were confused, but we found a building with chaplain's office on the directory, so we figured we'd been invited to some sort of civil ceremony. The building was locked. Now thoroughly confused and late at this point. As we were wondering what we should do, we see an older gentleman in a tuxedo wandering around. He's pretty clearly in the same boat. Turns out he's the groom's father and he doesn't have any more idea what's going on than we do. After a few more minutes, a soldier arrives. He's the chaplain's assistant and he's looking for lost wedding guests, namely the groom's father. Turns out the bride put down the wrong address and the wrong chapel name on the invitation. By the time we got to the wedding, which they had delayed because the groom's dad was missing, the bride was in tears. I felt so bad for her. They finally started the wedding, and the chaplain gave an awkward sermon about being clothed in Jesus' love and lost his place several times. Finally, as the ceremony was over and the guests began to applaud, a bat fell down out of the ceiling and died. Craziest wedding I'd ever been to. My time has come. Good friends getting married. It was a medium-sized wedding, no more than 75 people, including the bridal party and groomsmen. The bride's sister-in-law is pissed off something mighty. It was a wedding and reception by a lake, and everyone knew the venue, so we dressed accordingly, shirts and comfortable trousers, sundresses, and sandals, etc. Sister-in-law is dressed like she's heading out for an evening of dinner and dancing. Sky-high heels, tight dress, rhinestones everywhere. She looks gorgeous, but it's not comfortable. And we're outside. The ceremony is sweet, except for the words freaking bugs, freaking pine needles, goddamn dirt that's being picked up from the small, yet apparently mighty, microphone up front. Right after the ceremony, we walk over to the gazebo/picnic area, where the reception will be, and the sister-in-law starts lobbing her high heels at her husband, screeching about what an awful day it is, gashes her husband's eyebrow open. While people are scrambling to get him napkins, because facial wounds bleed like a mother freaker, and try to get him into a car, to drive him to the hospital for stitches, she decides to up the ante. She says I can't take this anymore, and throws herself off of the dock in a dramatic swan dive. The problem is, the lake at that point was only 4 feet deep and marshy, so instead of a suicide, she just sort of bobs along in the water because everyone's more concerned with her husband's eye/face. Sister-in-law's father just turns towards the lake, tells her to get her ass out of there and cut the crap. They pile into 2 cars and drove off. It was surreal.